Rip City Mornings.
I think number 2, health and safety, head exposures, risk of injury exposure for players. College football games average around 25 to 30 plays more than an NFL game and around 10 to 20 minutes longer than an NFL game on average. And so you're trying to cut down on the amount of plays because of the head exposures, and that's tied to the expansion of the college football playoff. You know, you're adding 8 games, you're adding 2 rounds of playoffs. Given the concussion litigation ongoing, you want to cut down on the exposures per game if you can, and that's what they're trying to do. And then the third reason is that just, the pace of play in college football, maybe not as smooth as the NFL. They want to keep it a little going at a rate where you don't have as many interruptions, so to speak. And some of these proposals, they believe will shorten the game and thus reducing the head exposures and maybe having a smoother game and maybe be a little better for fan experience.
Russ Dellenger of Sports Illustrated joining us here on 620 Rip City Radio to talk some college football. I think there's kind of, I don't know, maybe they're one and the same, but I do kind of see a difference, Ross, and tell me if you agree or disagree. There's like the overall length of games, which has a lot of factors in there. I think one of which is half times, which again, you don't want marching band Twitter to come after you, but I think there is a real thing with college football half times needing to be 20 to 25 minutes, which they are, I think, on average right now, I think. And then there's there's the overall length of games, and then there's kind of like you mentioned, the pace, where it's like everything's going well. It's a good game. It might be up around 3:15, 3:20 in terms of the way it's going, but then it just grinds to a halt because of the arbitrary review process. Is there any talks that you have heard about potentially kind of looking at the review process in college football and maybe going more towards an NFL model of giving coaches challenges and then only coming from, the eye in the sky if it's on turnovers and touchdowns?
Well, that's not one of the proposals this year right now being considered, but it has been discussed. And I think eventually we could see college football going to a coach's challenge system like the NFL does. Right now, about, the average FBS game this past season, there were 2.3 on average replays, reviews per game. And although it feels like there are more, some games might have a lot more, 3, 4, 5. And they're trying to certainly cut down on those. And I think a way to do it is a coach's challenge system where maybe each coach gets 2 challenges. You lose timeout if you lose the challenge, and you review scoring plays and plays inside of 2 minutes instead of reviewing, as current college rules now requires, every play is actually reviewed up in the booth live, and every play can be stopped if the booth reviewer sees something maybe inaccurate. So that's certainly been discussed, and I would imagine maybe not this year, but in years to come, that we will see some kind of change to the replay system in college football.
Because I think it's different situations and everything obviously needs to be in context. I mean, when you're looking at kind of the length of the game, I think there's a difference if, Oregon and Washington are coming down to the wire and it's a touchdown game and they're going back and forth, as opposed to in the under the same rules, right? Oregon State's beating Eastern Washington by about 4 touchdowns, and then they stop the game in the fourth quarter because the third string tight end might have gotten a toe out of bounds on the first down catch, and that they need to review that too. It seems to me like there's got to be a way you can kind of find a balance between the two and kind of streamline it, right?
Sure, yeah, and I think that they realize that some first quarter second down catch in the grand scheme of things may not matter. Most of the time, probably doesn't matter to the game, to the game result. And so why are we spending time looking at that and stopping the game? So, yeah, I think they realize that's an issue. But there are 2 things that are kind of non-starters, and I think you mentioned one there about halftime. The band directors university presidents, anytime officials bring up reducing halftime from 20 minutes, which it is now, to maybe 16 or even 18, they get some pretty loud pushback. And the NFL halftime is at 12 minutes. So that's an 8-minute difference. And according to last year's figures, college game was right at 11 minutes on average longer than NFL games. So that just leaves you with basically 3 to 4 minutes that a college game is longer than the NFL if you do reduce halftime to 12 minutes to the NFL halftime. But that is a non-starter. Will not happen. I think the other non-starter is TV commercials. They'll continue to be the length that they are and as frequent as they are. I think that the main revenue generating source for schools and conferences is television contracts, and those television contracts are so lucrative because of TV ads.
Ross Dellenger of Sports Illustrated joining us here on 620 Rip City Radio, talking college football and beyond potential rule changes. Obviously, there are some pretty significant changes to our beloved conference out west, Ross. We have one more season with USC and UCLA, and they obviously become Big Ten schools. And there's talk of conference expansion. And I kind of mentioned it right at the top. We may all be stealing passwords to get Apple TV Plus, maybe to be watching games for the Pac-12. I know that we are all kind of used to watching TV via streaming, right? We all have Netflix. We all have some sort of streaming service. I think most people who have that kind of technology. It's not that the technology is all that crazy and out there, but we're really not quite used to it with regard to watching sports. What kind of impact could this have on the Pac-12 if, in fact, the primary viewing option for the Pac-12 conference is Apple TV Plus, a streaming service that's not on, your normal guide on cable TV?
Well, I think any TV package that is only streaming in 2023 is not going to be great, or in this case, 2024 and beyond, is not going to be great. In 2030, maybe that's different. Maybe we all have different perspectives on that, but it feels too early to go streaming only. And from what I understand, the Apple TV package won't necessarily be streaming early. They have a sub-license where they could maybe license game to ESPN or something like that. But even if a majority, 60%, 70% of football games in the Pac-12 and basketball games are streaming only, that's going to be difficult to swallow. Because I think there's a couple points here. I mean, one is the money, obviously, and the money might, Apple TV might give the Pac-12 enough money to get pretty close to the Big 12 number of around $30 million a year. But the visibility would be an issue, and the exposure. Right now, you mentioned it, the Pac-12 has had an exposure visibility issue with the Pac-12 network. And subscribers and how many households they're in. That would be another issue if they went majority streaming. Is that something that triggers schools to rethink their future in the Pac-12? Mm-hmm. Maybe so. Well,
this is kind of an open-ended question, and obviously there's a lot of different avenues you could head down, but Ross, what the heck happened? What the heck happened to the Pac-12 conference? Obviously, football seemed a bit better this year. I think leadership under Kliavkoff instead of Larry Scott has been, I think, massively better out here. And obviously there is always going to be an issue because we are on the West Coast. Our games do start later. We are fighting against East Coast bedtimes as opposed to fighting against other competition. But how did it get to this point where seemingly Fox, NBC, ESPN Limited, but all of these big-time TV providers that the Pac-12 has always kind of been partnered with are now essentially out of the Pac-12 business? How the heck did it get so bad?
Well, I mean, I'm sure there's a much deeper dive, a longer conversation you could have on the Pac-12 football and why in the position the last 7 to 10 years that it's in, and how it's probably going to get worse with the departure of a school like USC in the LA market. But I think it all goes back, I think, to explain how the country in general views football and college football specifically. It all goes back to the geography and culture and the footprint, and how football is viewed. And I think if you look in the Southeast and certainly parts of the Midwest and in Texas, you will have a different culture that kind of, you hate to say it's a cliche, but does live and breathe football, high school football and into college football. And I don't think you see that as much on the West Coast. And I did this study a couple of years ago based on some 24/7 sports recruiting numbers, but I believe it is in the 11 state footprint of the SEC. There were two-thirds of the 5-star talent from like a 10-year span. So 5-star recruits, 2/3 of the 5-star recruits in all of the country, 2/3 of them were located in those 11 states. And I think so it goes back to breeding football and breeding good football players, right, in that region, and players staying close to home and playing in the SEC, ACC, maybe select schools in the Big Ten. And then when you have good players, you win football games, right? And you have more money and you can hire better coaches. And then you start recruiting nationally. And then you get the other third of 5-star players located, many of them in California. Then you start getting those kids because they want to play in a stadium of 100,000, 90,000 people where football is different. And so I think, that's one way to boil it down, but I think that's a big part of it.
It's going to be a fascinating situation to see what happens. Obviously, never sleep on the college football offseason, because just when you think we can kind of hit cruise control, something crazy gets thrown into the mix. Hey, Ross, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. Have a terrific rest of your day. We'll talk to you soon.